let's welcome Mr. Burg, and I'll give you a formal introduction in a second. Bob, welcome to the Massimo Show.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you for those kind words.
Blown away is all I can say. We've had we have New York Times best-selling authors, major thought leaders. And then when I had the opportunity to have you as a guest, I jumped right on it. And then when I read the book, I was like, cheese and crackers. I actually get to meet this guy. So we're thrilled to have you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's let the audience really know who Bob Burg is. And I'm going to give you a little introduction, and then we're going to dive into it. And the audience knows the way we work is we'll get to learn a little more about Bob beyond his introduction. And then we're going to talk about his book and the application of that book to you, our audience, who are either independent contractors, solopreneurs, or small business owners, and you want to gain more margin in your life. So who is Bob Burg? Bob Burg is, without a doubt, a sought-after speaker for company leadership, conferences, always sharing the platform in regards to the business leaders and broadcast personalities. And he even spoke in front of a U.S. president, which, Bob, I got to find out what that means. I got to find out who that was. But he's the author of several books. We talked about that. And certainly his best book, most popular book, the one that has sold the most, is the book called The Go-Giver, which is co-authored with John David Mann. And it sold, get this, folks, over 925,000. Put that in mind, 1,000 copies. And yes, it's been translated to over 28 languages. His parable, The Go-Giver, and in the series, there's a whole series, this new one called The Go-Giver Influencer, is incredible. You know, Bob's an advocate and supporter of the free enterprise system. He believes that the amount of money one makes is directly proportional to how much we serve. And we want to talk into that as well. So Bob's also an animal lover. In fact, before this podcast, he was letting out his favorite cat/dog/entity, Calvin. So Bob, welcome to the Massimo Show.
Thanks, Rod. It's so great to be with you. It really is. Thank you.
It's an honor, sir. It really is. So before we dive into this amazing parable that you and your friend John wrote, I want to talk about you specifically, and how we got to the point of being positioned to write such an incredible book. So Bob, take us back. Teenage Bob Burg. Who was he? Where was he living? What kind of passions did he have?
Well, grew up in Massachusetts, great parents, so I was very blessed by that. I wanted to actually be third baseman for the Boston Red Sox when I grew up, and I think I could have been. The only thing I was lacking was any semblance of talent. I think I could have nailed it. So I had always had an interest in broadcasting, being a sportscaster. I started out, got a job in radio as a sportscaster, and then ended up being the late night news anchor for a very small ABC affiliate in the Midwestern United States. Really was not very good at that, though. And it wasn't long until I graduated. I like to say graduated into sales. The challenge was that I had no training in sales. I didn't know anything about it. And the training where I first began working was, we'll say, negligible at best. When I say negligible, I mean non-existent. So, I was just knocking on doors, making calls, telling people, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know any better. And I floundered for the first few months. Eventually, I found my way into a bookstore, and this is almost 40 years ago now, and I got a couple of books. One was by Tom Hopkins, and one was by Zig Ziglar, and two legends, of course, to this day. And back then, they were the big sales teachers, and it just changed the whole game for me. I studied what they wrote, I applied what they wrote, and in no time, my sales began to go through the roof, which to me gave me a lot of confidence, because what it said is if you have a methodology, then, you can really accomplish just about anything. You and I spoke earlier about Michael Gerber, about one of his books. And of course, he, with the E-Myth, which was his original one, that was really, where he brought systems into play, where that was really first put into the mainstream systems, which, and to this day, I define a system simply as the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles, the key being predictability. If it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired results of B, then you know that all you need to do is A and continue to do A and continue to do A. Eventually, you'll get the desired results of B. And of course, Dr. Gerber showed us how to come up with systems for our businesses. And so from there, I started really studying sales. I loved it, loved everything about it.
Let me ask you a question. I'm sure folks say, well, what were you selling, Bob? And then when you start turning your results around, so what industry was that in? Service, product? What were you actually selling?
At that time, I was selling advertising. television and radio advertising. And then I moved into selling solar energy hot water systems to consumers.
Okay.
So it was two very, very different types of sales. One was selling the invisible in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, who was a Beckwith, and I'm trying to think of the first name, wrote a great book called Selling the Invisible. And I'm not placing his first name, but it was a wonderful book. And the other was very much a product. But you know what? It doesn't matter because it's always about the customer. It's always about how they are going to benefit. And so when we have that in mind more than anything else, then we're always, facing in the right direction. And I'll never forget what a great drive-by mentor once told me. And drive-by mentor is a term that my good friend and a mentor of mine, Dante Scumaci, came up with. She's one of the top leadership authorities in the world. The companies she does business with are the top. I mean, they're all over the place. She's a very quiet star and she's very humble. So when we say a drive-by mentor, we mean someone who we may not have ever met or maybe just knew very indirectly, but they said something that happened to come at the right time when you needed to hear it and you were open to hearing it, and it made a huge difference in your life. And it had been a couple of years that I'd been in sales and I was doing pretty well, but not nearly to the point I could have been. So I was sort of like Joe, the protagonist and the main protege, right, in the story of the Go-Giver. And I think this guy saw me as sort of a Joe. He said to me, he worked at the company where I worked. He wasn't in sales. I think he was in engineering or something. I don't. But he said, Burg, can I give you some advice? Because I'd come back to the office after a non-selling appointment, not non-selling by design. It was supposed to be a selling. And I must have looked kind of disgusted at myself. But he said, can I give you some advice? I said, yeah, please do. And he said, Burg, if you want to make a lot of money in selling, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, you'll get a reward. And that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It ain't the target itself. Your target is serving others. And that's where it really kind of hit me that all the sales skills, all the skills are important. They're wonderful and they're necessary, but it's really all about understanding that great salesmanship is never about the salesperson. It's not even about the product or the service. It's about your prospective customer and how their lives will be positively touched and affected through your product or service.
Okay, well, we're going to dive into that deep when we get to the book, but you just mentioned a couple of things there that, wow, I love that term, the non-selling appointment. Non-selling appointment. I can't imagine how many non-selling appointments I've been on, my team's been on, our listeners have been on. So what you learned from that was that you were selling a product or service at that time. That was the issue versus getting this adjustment of maybe looking at a different light.
Oh, yeah, very much so. And of course, as you alluded to, that's in a sense the premise of the Go-Giver, right? Mm-hmm. That shifting your focus off of yourself and onto others. And we say, shifting your focus from getting to giving. When we say giving, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others, understanding that not only is that not only is it a nice way, a pleasant way of conducting business, it's the most financially profitable way as well. Not for some way out there, woo-woo, nicey nice reason, but it makes sense. It makes rational, logical sense. Why? Because when you can move off of yourself and onto making others' lives better, people feel good about you. They want to get to know you. They like you. They trust you. They want to be a part of your life. And here's the thing, okay? And I often say this when I speak at sales conferences, and I don't say it in a dogmatic fashion. I say it in a joking around way, but nobody is going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet.
Like Joe.
Right, exactly. They're not going to buy from you because you need the money, and they're not even going to buy from you because you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you only because they believe they'll be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And in a free market-based economy, free market simply meaning no one is forced to buy from anyone else. In a free market-based economy, it's the only reason why they should buy from you or from me or from anyone else, which is great. Because it means that salesperson, that entrepreneur who can focus, laser focus on bringing immense value to the other person, they're the one that's going to have the business.
Okay, wow, so much to unpack here. One thing, first of all, folks, if you're not watching the video, you're listening in your car, the podcast, the passion that comes through from this gentleman's incredible. It absolutely is. But before we get to this amazing book, I'm going to dive deep into it. Before then, if you can help me, Bob. So how do you apply this to your practice? And before we get to the writing side of Bob, your actual sales practice. So how do you take this advice and this approach? Give me some detail how you applied it and the results you saw by going this route instead.
It's just what I started doing. And I eventually worked my way up to sales manager of that company. And the big thing was sharing it with the other people in the company now so that they could understand that same premise. And eventually others who had kind of heard what was going on with our company asked me to speak to theirs, and it kind of just grew like that. But there really isn't anything more to applying it than just simply applying it. And I think sometimes we as human beings, we almost kind of make it too difficult. And again, sales is something that you do have to work at. And again, I'm very much into the sales skills and absolutely that a pro, school's never out for the pros. And excellence in sales means you're always studying, you're reading, you're listening, you're watching, you're keeping up with the latest, right?
I got to stop you because, again, you're hitting these major themes that you take for granted. It's your subconscious competence says this is the way it is. But you just hit the nail on the head, which is so, so important for everyone to hear, accept, recognize. You just said school is never out for who?
The pros.
They're right. School's never out for the pros, right? It's never. I forget the Naval SEAL quote in regards to amateurs, and amateurs do it till they get it right.
Get it right.
Professionals do it till they can't get it wrong. I believe
right, exactly.
Quote. But we are sales professionals. So you're telling me, Bob, despite all your success that you have today and selling over 1 million copies of this amazing book, you still educate yourself every day on getting better?
Absolutely. I got to tell you a couple quick things. There was a guy years ago when I first started speaking. His name was Sam Edwards. Sam was a well-known humorist back in the day. And I think it was my second National Speakers Association convention. It was in Atlanta. Apparently, Sam, he must have been close to 90 years old. Apparently, he drove up himself from South Florida. If I'd known that, I'd have driven with him, but I didn't even know he was doing that. But you see him at this conference, front row, taking copious notes. Okay, that's a pro. I had a lunch shortly before Zig Ziglar died. I was in Carrollton, Texas, and I was on a video cast that Tom was hosting. And so I had the honor of having lunch with Tom and with his dad, Zig. And we were talking about continuing education and so forth. And at that time, Zig, you may or may not know, had an injury where he lost basically all his short-term memory. Okay. And it was really very, very sad, but he had the best attitude and his family was so loving and wonderful. It was just amazing. But we were at lunch and Zig, who again had pretty much lost his memory at that point, took out of his jacket pocket a notepad and a pen and said, "This is what I do to continue learning every day." I mean, Zig Ziglar, who has more knowledge in his little finger than I'll ever have in my entire body. And school wasn't out for him either. So I've got lots of work to do.
That is an amazing story. And in fact, we're going to be honored to have Tom as our guest next week on the Massimo Show. But wow. Okay, so here's what we do. Before our break, Bob, let's just take 30 seconds and set up the Go-Giver. Who are the characters? What are we going to learn about? Set it up for us.
Well, Joe is a young, ambitious, aggressive, up-and-coming, nice guy, means well, but very much it's all about himself. It's all about me, me, me. He's the ultimate of the I focus or me focus. And what he does is he meets Pindar, a main mentor, and some other friends of Pindar, and he kind of learns that shift in focus is going to not only make for a happier life, it's going to make for a much more financially profitable and successful business.
Okay, well, here you have it. We're going to come back for the second part of this incredible session with Bob Burg. We're learning about Joe, about Pindar, a little bit about Gus, and really about the week he's about to have and that final special guest that Joe gets to meet on that final day with Pindar. It's an amazing story. We're going to dive into it. So hold on, come right back. Until then, this is Santomassimo with our special guest, Bob Burg. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hi, Hi, this is Rod Santomassimo, president and founder of the Massimo Group. And did you know that for over the past 11 plus years, we've worked with thousands of independent contractors, solopreneurs, and small business owners just like you in repositioning their and/or their team's efforts so they can build the personal, professional practice they've always dreamed of. We provide coaching programs for all levels of experience, earnings, and yes, success. So if you're finally ready to get off that transaction treadmill and chasing deals that are growing nowhere and start building the personal, professional business and life consisting of greater wealth and more time, well, check us out at Massimo.coach. That's Massimo.coach.
Hey, this is Rod Santomassimo with the Massimo Show, and we're back for the second half of this incredible session with the one and only Bob Burg. And now it's time to learn about Joe. Joe, so much going on with Joe and how Joe changes, transforms, and sees the light. Joe has a problem though, Bob. You know, when we are introduced to Joe, he just hung up the phone. He lost that key account. And gosh, he has a quota coming up. So his focus is on making his quota, which a lot of salespersons, that's what they focus on. So the problems start there. So help us out a little bit. I'm going to ask you about the book, but give us a little more detail of the journey of Joe.
Yeah, well, it was that big kahuna he was going after, and the client just decided that Joe and the company he worked for didn't really have the necessary connections and so forth, so they ended up going with someone else, and he got the news from someone who he felt really owed him, and, because that's what Joe was, really about. And again, he wasn't a bad guy, just a little bit misguided, and who isn't when they're young and they start? And so he ended up he went in the office to actually see Gus, who's one of kind of the main characters in the story, who sort of just is that wise older guy. And he seems to Joe to sort of not really be particularly focused, although he's much more focused than he would seem. Mm-hmm. And he's a very, very top producer, but he's also very connected. And he connects Joe with Pindar, who surprisingly enough to Joe agrees to see him. And Joe thinks he's going to use him for his, quote, clout and leverage. But it ends up he gets something a lot more from Pindar, which is some real principles of life and business. And the good guys win in the end. So,
the good guys win in the end.
But everyone lives happily ever after.
So it is a parable. So is it a fable? Not really, because these lessons absolutely work. So let's talk about these 5 laws during the journey that Joe realizes he needs to adapt to really change his whole perspective. Share with us those 5 laws if you can. Sure. Again, you keep it brief. I want people to buy the book, dive in, and apply the book, more importantly. So share with these 5 laws.
Yeah, and by the way, so it is a parable. It is a work of fiction, but a lot of the incidents in the book happened in real life. We just put them into the story. But it is certainly a work of fiction, and it doesn't usually have the results quite as quickly as, in the story. But the 5 laws themselves are the laws of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. The law of value says that your true worth, in the business sense, of course, your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Now, when you first hear that, it's a little counterintuitive because it kind of sounds like a recipe for bankruptcy, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Give more in value than you take in payment. Until you understand the difference between price and value. That price is a dollar figure, it's a dollar amount, it's finite. Value is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, that brings so much worth or value to another human being that they will willingly pay for it and be glad they did, while you make a very healthy profit? One of the characters in the story is Ernesto, who owns a very upscale cafe. Now, if you go to his restaurant, you're going to pay a pretty penny, right? Mm-hmm. But you're going to come away, your bill might be $150, but you come away feeling like $1 million. The way you're treated, the food's great, the ambiance wonderful, the wait staff, they know just how to treat you, when to pay attention, when to let you go. Everything there is such an immense experience that you feel just like you received so much more than what you paid for, which you did. But of course, Ernesto's costs are far lower than what he charges. In fact, it's really the law of value represents the ultimate in a free market-based exchange where there are always two profits, the buyer profits and the seller profits, because each comes away better off afterwards than they were before.
Correct me if I'm wrong, please, Bob. I believe it was Joe who ignorantly thought that Ernesto had the best hot dog stand in the market. And Ernesto corrects him and says, no, that's not what I was recognized as. It was different, correct?
Yeah, because Ernesto, before his restaurant, began as having a single hot dog stand.
But it's
And
about
he
the
was
dining
recognized
experience.
as the best dining experience.
That's right.
Right. And Joe, who really wasn't paying attention, because at the time he kind of thought Ernesto was just a maitre d' or, what have you. And so, the lesson there for Joe is not everything is as it seems. In fact, many things aren't. So humble yourself, young man. It says, now, the law number 2, the law of compensation, says your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. So where law number 1 says to give more in value than you take in payment, law number 2 tells us that the more people whose lives we touch with the exceptional value we provide, the more money with which we'll be rewarded. The mentor in that part of it, her name was Nicole Martin, the CEO. She explained to Joe that the law of value, which is the foundational principle, that represents your potential income, but it's law number 2 that represents your actual income, because that's the number of lives you impact. And that's so key. It's not just providing exceptional value, it's touching the lives of a lot of people with that value.
So let me translate this. And a lot of people are saying, okay, well, the heck, that makes sense, Bob. Sure, as long as you create more value, right, to a greater number of people, the more income I'll receive. But it's not that simple. It's not that linear, because it really is the challenge of creating that value experience for so many people. That is the challenge. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah. You've got to be able to obviously scale your work. That's why we're so big in terms of referrals as a way of doing that, because working with referred prospects gives you 4 very unique advantages. It's easier to set the appointment due to borrowed influence. Generally, with a referred prospect, price is less of an issue. So rather than trying to sell on low price, you're able to sell on high value. Very important, because we live in a very commoditized world now. Technology has leveled the playing field, and most products and services work, and they're pretty much the same. If a potential customer cannot distinguish between any 2 or more products or services, they're typically going to go with who has the lowest price. And unless your last name is Walmart or Amazon.com, trying to make low price your unique selling proposition is not a productive way to do business. It's not profitable. It's not fun. It's not sustainable. So, when you sell on low price, you're a commodity. When you sell on high value, you're a resource. Another benefit of a referred prospect is it's easier to complete the transaction or close the sale based on borrowed trust, or what we call vicarious experience. In other words, this person hasn't done business with you personally, but someone who they know, like, and trust has said, yes, this is the person who will take care of you, who will put your interests first, who will deliver what they say when they say. And of course, with a referred prospect, they're already of the mindset that that's how you do business. So they're much more likely to refer you to others, so long as you approach it the correct way. So we're big believers in referral-based business.
Okay, so we got 2 laws, right? We got the value, and then we have, as far as the scalability, the impact, and the people you actually impact with that value. Love it. 3rd law. During Joe's journey, how does he learn about this 3rd law?
This is the law of influence. And the law of influence says your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Again, this sounds counterintuitive, but this is just how the top leaders, great influencers, and the top money earners, this is just how they run their lives and conduct their business. They're always placing others' interests first in terms of the value that they bring. Now, let me qualify this, because I think this is very important. It can easily be misunderstood, and it's really important to not do that. When we say place the other person's interests first, we do not mean you should be anyone's doormat or a martyr or self-sacrificial in any way. Absolutely not at all. It's simply that, as Joe learned from several of the mentors, The golden rule of business, golden rule of sales is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And there's no faster, more powerful, or more effective way to elicit those feelings toward you and others than by genuinely and authentically moving from that I focus or me focus to that other focus. Or as Sam, one of the mentors in the story, advised Joe, making your win all about the other person's win.
Love it. Love it. So let's get to lesson number 4 in Joe's journey.
This is the law of authenticity. And it says the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. The main mentor in this chapter was Deborah Davenport, who was a realtor. And the lesson she had learned that she shared was that all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and as you and I talked about earlier, they are very, very important. But they're also all for naught if you don't come at it from your true, authentic core. But when you do, when you, as we like to say, show up as yourself, day after day, week after week, month after month, people feel good about you. They feel comfortable with you. They feel safe with you. They know you. They like you. They love you. They trust you. They're much more likely to want to be in a relationship with you and refer and introduce you to others.
Incredible. Okay. So Joe's almost done. Now he thinks he's having a big meeting. So he goes to the mansion, wondering, he's guessing who he's going to meet. First, he thought it was
Rachel?
No, the name was the young lady who makes the great coffee.
Yeah, Rachel.
Rachel, right, Rachel. But he was wrong. So who is Joe? Well, don't give that away. Don't give that away. I want people to.
We won't give away the Friday guess.
No, don't give away the Friday lesson.
But we can talk about the law, which is the law.
Yeah, actually talk about the law. Tell me about the law, the 5th law.
Yeah, because this is what really brings it home. Now we have the law of receptivity, which says the key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving. And this really means nothing more than understanding that as human beings, we breathe out, but we also have to breathe in, both to survive and to thrive. So we breathe out carbon dioxide and we breathe in oxygen. We breathe out, which is giving. We breathe in, which is receiving. And that, contrary to what we learn from the world around us, which gives us not a mixed message about money and prosperity, but a very negative message about money and prosperity, despite those messages, the truth is that giving and receiving are not opposite concepts. Giving and receiving are simply two sides of the very same coin, and they work in tandem. You're not a giver or a receiver. You're a giver and a receiver. But what you realize is that the way the laws of nature work, the giving must be first. The giving comes first, the giving of value to others. We sow before we reap. That's just how it is everywhere. But this is also why we say that money is simply an echo of value, right? It's the thunder, if you will, to values lightning, which means nothing more than that when we focus on the giving, and we allow the receiving, which is important. You need to allow the receiving. You will have abundance. You'll live in abundance. This can be tough because, we get so many of those horrible messages from everywhere around us that it can really get into our heads on an unconscious level. And we can sabotage ourselves from that financial success unless we really think about it. So that's why I'm a big believer in actively seeking out good information on prosperity. Randy Gage's website, Bob Proctor's information, David Nagel's information, and really, on a daily basis, make a study of prosperity.
Well, we're going to put all those names up on the video, including how to contact you. But Bob, I have to ask, can you stick around for a few more minutes?
Sure.
I'll tell you what, we're going to have a bonus session with Bob Burg. We're going to dive in some questions about the book. Amazing. But look, here's the thing. My listeners, you heard me say this all the time, and I'm going to break the rule today. I've always said my key goal of every book is to get one sentence that changes my business or my life. So, for example, in Gerber's book, I said process. It's got to be process. And that really assisted my company in growing. And then I think it was Hyper Sales Growth or Sales Book by Jack Daly. If you do not have an admin, you are one. Cheese and crackers. Was that right? So true. change the trajectory. Same with 4-hour work week, one thing in there, Elance figured it out. But I got to tell you, it's impossible, Bob, for me to say there was one thing in your book that changed my practice or my life because of the whole damn book, that the 5 laws. But here's one thing you just said. Again, you say things that just come out naturally. Wow. Money is simply an echo of value. Wow.
Please understand, though, that I got the honor and privilege of working with an amazingly brilliant man by the name of John David Mann. And so, without him and his brilliance and his writing skills, that this book wouldn't have sung and been the success that it's been.
Absolutely understand. Folks, stay with us. We're coming back for a special bonus 3rd session and final session with the one and only Bob Burg at the Massimo Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Rod Santomassimo. Talk to you soon.
Hey, this is Rod Santomassimo, and we always tell our coaching clients that knowing isn't doing. That's right. Don't kid yourself. In fact, in my new book, Don't Kid Yourself, Knowing Isn't Doing, Build the Business and Life You Desire, I lay out many of our Massimo methods that we share with our clients to help them transform their lives. My new book, Knowing Isn't Doing, is going through a soft launch that will happen in March of 2020, and then a big national launch in September 2020. For more information, check out knowingisn'tdoing.com.
Welcome back to the Massimo Show. This is Rod Santomassimo with the one and only Bob Burg. Just share with us these 5 laws that are so incredible that changed the life of Joe, but frankly, are applicable to your life and will change your life and your results when, not if. We don't believe in if, we believe in when they're applied. So, Bob, I got to ask you some questions because this book really has more about an entrepreneurial spirit in itself, but it really can be applicable to anyone, even someone that's maybe an employer or otherwise. It's a pretty applicable book, would you not say?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, someone who works within someone else's company, they may not be an entrepreneur, but they're certainly an intrapreneur. And they have to continually provide more in value than what they're taking in payment, because just like nobody's going to buy from me because you have a quota to meet, no employer is going to keep you on the payroll because you have a mortgage payment to make. So you have to continue to find ways to add more value, bring more value, be of more value, and make yourself invaluable to the organization. But your customers, instead of being the end users, they're your supervisor or your coworkers, your employer, what have you.
Let's talk about this principle of influence. It seems, well, it's not really a simple principle. It's not. So look, if they're not an author, they're not a thought leader, they're not a leader in general, how the heck am I going to be an influencer? So help us out there. What's the track to becoming that influencer that you're talking about?
Well, when you think about it, in even the term influence, how is it defined? And I think there are 2 ways to look at influence. On a very surface level, you can define influence as simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. That's the definition, but it's not really its essence. The essence of influence is pull as opposed to push, right? As in the question, how far can you push a rope? And the answer is not very far, at least not very effectively or very quickly. So great influencers don't push. They don't push their ideas on others. They don't push their will on each other's. They aren't push-y, right? Instead, they go the opposite way. They pull, they attract, because people, to influence others, they must first buy into you. Only then do they buy into your idea. So the question becomes, how do you do that? How does this pull manifest itself? And it's really nothing more than understanding. And I think Dale Carnegie, in his landmark classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People, to me, the underlying premise of his entire book was where he wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons, right? So the great influencer, what we call the genuine influencer, asks themselves questions to make sure they're focused correctly, such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals? How does it align with their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I want this other person to do, how does it align with their values? What problems am I helping them to solve? How am I helping them to improve their life. Okay. And when we ask ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way of building everyone in the process, now we've come a lot closer to earning that person's commitment rather than trying to depend on some type of compliance. And, we talked earlier about my great friend, one of my wonderful mentors, Dondi Scumaci. And I love what Dondi says about this. Of course, she's a great leadership coach now and speaker and author. And what she says is compliance will never take you where commitment can go, which means the leader must understand that great leadership is never about the leader. Great influencers have to understand that great influence is never about the influencer. It's always about that person whose life you're trying to touch.
Well, you just alluded to it, and that's incredible from your mentor. So let's end this up with helping our audience out. You obviously are mentors to so many people. In fact, let's face it, Bob, you and your co-writer, John, are now mentors to over 1 million people. You are. Donnie was a mentor to you. So how does one go about finding a mentor, developing this mentor relationship? Any advice there?
Well, I think you take it slowly in a sense. One of the big mistakes I see people today making, and people, by the way, always did this, I think. I mean, I remember people doing it 30, 40 years ago, is just sort of approaching someone who they don't know very well, with whom there's really no relationship, and just saying, hey, would you be my mentor? And nowadays it happens more because it's so much easier to reach someone, through social media and other ways. But when you just say to somebody who you admire, hey, will you be my mentor? It kind of, I think, comes across a little bit as entitled, or it's almost like saying to somebody, hey, would you share 30 years of your life experiences with me, even though you don't know me from a hole in the wall, right? So I don't think that's a real effective way to find a mentor. But I think what you can do is this. You can pretty much approach anyone at this point and just say, I understand you're very busy, so if this would not be appropriate or something you care to do, totally understandable. I'm wondering if I might ask you one or two very specific questions, okay? Because when you do that, you're doing a couple things. One, you're respecting the process, okay? Mm-hmm. They know you're a serious person. You're not someone who's just said, hey, can I pick your brain? Or can will you be, what have you? You've also given them the out. You've said to them, I understand you're very busy. If this is not something that would either be appropriate or something you'd even like to do, it's totally understandable. And when you give someone the out or back door, the bigger the out or back door you give someone to take, the less they feel the need to take it. And again, they see that you want to be very specific. So, make sure, of course, that you don't ask a question. And, most people will say, yeah, sure, go ahead. Now, not everybody will, and that's okay. Not everybody has to, but enough people will. And so when you ask these questions, make sure you've researched the person so you don't ask something that you could have known by looking the person up. But you don't take up too much of their time. You thank them profusely afterwards. I would write a handwritten, personalized thank you note to that person saying, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with me. I look forward to applying it right away, and I will be in touch and let you know how things go, what have you. I would also, even that day, and of course, by looking them up on the internet, you can discover what their favorite charitable cause is or something. And so let's say that they are an animal lover.
Right.
And so you make a small, it doesn't have to be anything big, but just a small donation in their name to the local animal shelter. And you make it in their name, they'll be notified about it. And you're not doing it to kiss up to them or anything, but again, to let them know you respect the process and that you're grateful to them and that you want to be of value to them as well. And so then, you might check back a few weeks later, a month later, you might ask another question or whatever. And if a mentor-protege relationship is supposed to grow, and it will, but a mentor-protege relationship is just that. It's a relationship, and it develops over time. And sometimes there'll be long-term relationships, and other times it might be a 1 or 2 time thing, and there might be some drive-by mentors you meet who happen to give you some great advice that you badly needed to hear at the moment. So, I think it's really the type of thing, be open to receive, okay? At the same time, always be looking for how you can bring value to the relationship.
I love it. Thank you so much for your sage advice. But people want to get more of you, Bob.